Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to trace the incredible story of how the modern state came to be. It's a journey that's really driven by revolution, by inequality, and ultimately by the search for justice.
You know, this whole story, it really just boils down to one fundamental question. It seems pretty simple, right? But how nations have answered this question has sparked revolutions and totally redefined what a government is even for. This single question is the key to the three huge transformations of the state that we're about to dive into.
All right, so let's start at the beginning. The big problem was the absolute monarch. This was a ruler who didn't just make the law, they were the law. You've probably heard Louis XIV's famous boast, "L'État c'est moi," I am the state. For any normal person, this meant your life, your property, everything was subject to the whims of one person. You didn't really have rights, you had duties.
So in response to this, you get the thinkers of the Enlightenment, you get the great revolutions of the 18th century, and they come up with this radical new idea, the liberal state. And it completely flipped the whole concept of power on its head. For the very first time, the law was placed above the government. People weren't subjects anymore, they were citizens with rights. And to make sure nobody could ever grab absolute power again, that power was split up and balanced.
Now, the heart of this new state was a brand new kind of right, negative rights. And you can think of these as basically a list of don'ts for the government. They create this protective bubble around you as an individual, telling the state, hey, don't interfere with my speech, don't touch my property, stay out of my beliefs. It was all about freedom from the state.
So a good way to think about the liberal state is like a referee in a game. Its job is just to make sure everyone plays by the rules. Enforce contracts, protect property, but it doesn't pick a team, it doesn't get involved in the actual game. This whole hands-off or laissez-faire approach was a massive change from the king, who literally owned the stadium and everybody in it.
Okay, but here's the thing. This whole hands-off approach, it created a new and massive problem. As the Industrial Revolution just exploded, it became painfully clear that total economic freedom, without any kind of safety net, could lead to just brutal exploitation. The game was fair by the rules, sure, but the players were starting from wildly different places, and that led to enormous inequality.
The writer Anatole France just captured the crisis of this system perfectly with this deeply sarcastic quote. Yeah, sure, the rules are the same for everybody, but what does equality really mean when some people have everything and other people have nothing? The right to freedom isn't much use if you're starving. And this glaring problem, it sparked the next great evolution of the state.
So all this injustice, it led to a totally new idea, a completely different kind of right called positive rights. If negative rights were a list of don'ts for the government, positive rights were a list of do's. The state was now being told, you must provide education, you must provide healthcare, you must provide a social safety net. For the very first time, the state had a proactive mission.
And just like that, the social state, what we often call the welfare state, was born. The state was no longer just a referee on the sidelines. It was now a key player on the field, actively trying to rebalance the scales. Its new mission was to go beyond just equality on paper and actually fight for real material equality in people's lives. And we saw this radical new idea pop up for the first time in places like the Constitution of Mexico in 1917 and Germany's Weimar Constitution just a couple of years later.
But then, the 20th century threw a horrifying curveball at this whole idea. Totalitarian regimes, like Nazism, proved that a state could have a perfectly functional system of laws, it could have a formal structure, and yet use that very system to commit unimaginable evil. The rules were being followed, but the outcome was pure atrocity. And this brings us to the absolutely crucial point. What do you do when the rules themselves are the source of the injustice? The world learned the hard way that a state governed by law is not automatically a just state. And that realization led to the final evolution in our story.
It was from the ashes of that horror that the democratic state of law was born. Now, this model says that law isn't just about following a process, it's about substance. The Constitution gets elevated from being a simple rulebook for how government works into a moral compass. All laws, all actions by the state have to align with its core values, and at the very center of all of it is the dignity of the human person.
And what's so smart about this is that this new model doesn't just toss out the old ones, it actually combines them. It takes the rule of law from the liberal state, and it takes the social safety net from the social state, but it anchors them both to this unbreakable moral core, human dignity. And this gives the state a brand new, transformative mission to actively build a more just society, using its own constitution as the roadmap.
Now, this whole three-act play of liberty, then equality, then justice, It isn't just some abstract theory from a textbook. It's a story that has played out for real, all over the world. And there's maybe no better place to see it in action than in Brazil, whose constitutional journey perfectly mirrors this incredible evolution.
So if you look at Brazil's history, you can see these stages play out. It starts with an imperial constitution that was weirdly absolutist in its politics, but liberal in its economics. Then the republic in 1891 goes full-on liberal. But by 1934, you can see the global trends and social rights make their first appearance. After a dark period, a regression during the military regime, the whole journey culminates in the 1988 Citizen Constitution, which was a direct response to that dictatorship.
And when you put the country's old liberal constitution side by side with its modern democratic one, man, the difference is just night and day. Back in 1891, the state's role was minimal, the goal was simple economic freedom, and property was an absolute right. But look at 1988. Everything changed. The state became an agent of social transformation, the goal became a dignified life for everyone, and property now had to serve a social function. The entire foundation of the state shifted from a set of rules to a core moral principle: human dignity.
And they didn't bury this idea in the fine print. No, it's right there in Article 1. Brazil's new constitution explicitly established a democratic state of law, and it declared that its ultimate foundations weren't just rules and procedures, but these profound values of citizenship and, most importantly, the dignity of every single human being.
So after this whole journey, from a king's whim all the way to a citizen's constitution, what's the big takeaway for us today?
Well, you can really think about the state's evolution as an expansion of its promise to us, the people. It started with a promise of liberty, basically to protect you from its own power. Then it added a promise of equality, to use its power to provide for you. And finally, it made the ultimate promise of dignity, to make sure that all of its power in every single action is used for a just and humane purpose.
And that leaves us with this really powerful final thought. A modern constitution, like Brazil's Citizen Constitution, isn't just a document that records the past or organizes the present. It's a statement of collective hope. It's a nation's promise to itself about the kind of just and dignified future it is committed to building together.